They thought they could scare me off, threatening letters, surprise visits, even calling the sheriff. The HOA believed they ruled over my lake cabin like kings of the water, but when I pulled out the real paperwork, the smug smiles disappeared fast. Turns out I owned more than just the cabin. The wind rattled the windows of my old lake cabin as I tossed another log into the wood stove. The warmth filled the single-room place, and the smell of burning pine mixed with the damp air rolling off Lake Greenwater. It was a piece of heaven even with the coming storm. This cabin had been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather built it back when the land around here wasn't filled with gated communities and pretentious weekenders sipping wine on their decks. He wanted a place to fish, hunt, and sit by the fire. And now, decades later, it was mine. The thing was, times had changed. What used to be wilderness had turned into lakefront property gold. People with more money than sense bought up lots, formed a homeowners association, and suddenly thought they owned not just their yards but the whole lake. The HOA president, a man named Gerald Withers, was the worst of the bunch. Thin as a rake, with a permanent scowl and a voice like a rusty hinge, he acted like he was the sheriff, mayor, and king rolled into one. He'd come by last summer, strutting up my dock in his khakis and golf shirt, informing me that my cabin violated several HOA ordinances. I'd laughed so hard I nearly fell off my porch swing. "Son," I told him, leaning on the railing, "this cabin was here before your precious HOA ever dreamed up their bylaws. You can take those ordinances and shove them right in the lake." That didn't sit well with Gerald. Since then, I'd gotten letters. Notice of violation, intent to fine, non-compliance warning, all of it junk mail as far as I was concerned. I never replied, never paid a dime, and kept living my life. But lately, things had escalated. 2 weeks ago, I came back from town to find a bright orange notice nailed to my front door. Eviction order. You have 30 days to vacate this property. Cho approved. That one made my blood boil. The HOA didn't own my cabin. Heck, as far as I knew, they didn't even own half the land they thought they controlled. My grandfather had left me not just the cabin, but the entire original property deed, something I hadn't looked at in years. Maybe it was time to dig it out. The next morning, I headed into town to see my old friend and local attorney, Frank Dalton. Frank was retired, but he knew land deeds like the back of his hand. He squinted through his thick glasses as I unfolded the crackling paper onto his desk. "Well, I'll be," he muttered, tracing the faded lines with a bony finger. "What?" I asked, sipping the burnt coffee he always kept in that dented pot of his. "This deed," he said slowly, "doesn't just cover your cabin. It covers the entire original tract your granddaddy bought back in 1952. According to this, you own all the way to the old survey markers, including the shoreline where that HOA boat dock sits." I blinked. "You mean, son," Frank said, grinning for the first time in years, "you don't just own your cabin. Legally speaking, you own half this lakefront. Those yahoos built their dock on your land." For a moment, I just sat there stunned. All those threats, all those letters. And they were the trespassers? Frank leaned back, chuckling. "I'd say it's time you paid Mr. Withers a little visit." The following Saturday, I got my chance. I was out on my porch sipping coffee. When I saw them coming, Gerald and 2 of his HOA cronies marching down the path in their matching polo shirts like they were storming Normandy. Gerald was waving a clipboard like it was a sword. "Mr. Thompson!" he barked. "You've ignored every notice we've sent. As of today, you are officially trespassing on HOA property. We've begun proceedings to have you removed." I set my mug down and stood, stretching slowly just to watch his eye twitch. "Is that so?" I said. "Yes, that's so," Gerald snapped. "This cabin violates code. Your dock is unauthorized. Your woodpile is a fire hazard. And frankly, this whole shack ruins the aesthetic of our lake community." One of the cronies, a short guy with a sunburn, piped up. "Gerald, maybe we should call the sheriff now. Get this over with." "Not yet," Gerald said, glaring at me. "We'll give him until the end of the week. After that, we're bringing in county enforcement." I let them finish their little speech. Then I pulled a folded paper from my jacket pocket and handed it to Gerald. "What's this?" he asked, frowning. "Property deed," I said casually. "Take a good look at the boundary lines." He scanned it, scowled, then scanned it again. His face went pale. This can't be right," he muttered. "It shows." "But that would mean—" "Yeah," I said, grinning. "Means your fancy HOA dock? Sits right on my land. Means half your lakefront picnic area? Also mine. Matter of fact, Gerald, Looks like your HOA's been trespassing on me for years. The short crony looked like he might faint. Gerald just sputtered like a lawnmower that wouldn't start. This will not stand, he finally said, crumpling the paper slightly. We'll contest this. The HOA has lawyers. Good, I said. So do I. Over the next week, things got ugly. I started getting calls from HOA members demanding I sell them the land at a fair price. One even offered me 10 grand, like he was doing me a favor. I laughed him off the phone. Gerald put up signs around the lake claiming my deed was fraudulent and warning residents not to engage with me. That one really made Frank chuckle when I told him. Son, he said, they don't have a leg to stand on. Let him bluster. Still, I knew Gerald wouldn't quit easy. The man was used to getting his way, and sure enough, a week later I came home to find surveyors on my land, hammering stakes into the ground. I marched down there. What do you think you're doing? Cho hired us, one of them said nervously. They claim this is their property. I pointed at the stakes. Pull them up now, or I call the sheriff and file trespassing charges. They packed up real quick, but the final straw came 2 days later. I woke up to the sound of hammering and shouting, looked out my window, and saw the HOA tearing down my dock. That was it. I grabbed my phone, called Frank, then called the county sheriff. By the time I got down to the shore, Gerald and his crew were halfway through ripping up the boards. Morning, I said calmly. You boys know you're committing felony property damage right now? Gerald turned, sweaty and red-faced. You're the trespasser! We're reclaiming HOA land! I just smiled. Funny, sheriff's on his way. Hope you got permits for all this. That made him pause, because of course they didn't. The sheriff arrived 20 minutes later. Big guy named Hank, who'd known my family for years. He listened to both sides, looked at my deed, then sighed. Gerald, he said, hate to break it to you, but this paperwork's legit. Means you and your HOA been building on private property that ain't yours. Gerald's face turned the color of week-old liver. But we have bylaws. Bylaws ain't the law, Hank said dryly. Pack it up. You touch one more board on this man's dock. I'll be booking you for vandalism. Watching Gerald choke on his own indignation was the best thing I'd seen all year. That night, I sat by the fire with a glass of bourbon thinking it was over. But deep down I knew Gerald, he wouldn't give up, and sure enough, the real fight was just beginning. The morning after the sheriff shut Gerald down, the lake was as calm as glass, the kind of quiet that almost feels like a warning. I brewed coffee, sat on the porch, and waited for whatever the HOA had planned next. Because I knew Gerald, with that shriveled pride of his, he wouldn't let this drop. And sure enough, by noon, a thick envelope appeared in my mailbox. Notice of legal action. I opened it right there on the steps. The HOA, through some law firm out of the city, claimed they were filing suit to establish rightful ownership of the disputed lakefront property, citing community easements and historical precedent. It was written in that smug lawyer language meant to scare people who didn't know better. Trouble was, I did know better. I drove straight to Frank Dalton's office. The old attorney read through the paperwork, snorted like he'd swallowed a fly, and tossed it on his desk. They don't have a case, he said flatly. Easements don't magically appear just because some HOA says so. If anything, they've been trespassing on you for years. We could countersue for damages. Damages? I asked, leaning back in the creaky chair. Sure. They built that whole dock without permission. Hosted events on your land. Technically, they owe you rent for every square foot they've used. Frank leaned forward, eyes gleaming. Son, we can turn this around on them so hard Gerald won't know which way's up. The thought made me grin. But Frank wasn't done. Still, he added, they'll try to drag this out. I always love their power trips. You ready for a fight? I thought about Gerald's smug face, about the years of harassment, the eviction notice nailed to my door. Oh, I said. I'm ready. Word spread fast around the lake. By the weekend, people were whispering in the bait shop, the diner, the gas station. Everyone wanted to know if it was true the HOA didn't own the land under their own dock. Some were furious at Gerald for stirring up trouble. Others backed him, saying I was a troublemaker ruining their peaceful community. I didn't care either way, but then I started getting visitors. First was Linda Parker, a middle-aged woman with a tight bun and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She marched up my path carrying a plate of cookies like this was going to be a friendly chat. "Mr. Thompson," she began sweetly, "we all just want what's best for the neighborhood. If you'd be willing to sell the disputed land to the HOA, we could make this all go away." I bit into a cookie. Too sweet. Like her. "Not for sale," I said. She blinked. "Surely we can reach some compromise." "Gerald says the board might approve a generous offer." "Not for sale," I repeated. Her smile twitched. "You realize this lawsuit will get expensive?" I handed the plate back. "So will trespassing fines." She left in a huff. Next came the letters. One from Gerald personally, calling me a selfish holdout destroying community harmony. Another from the HOA's attorney threatening to seek a court injunction to seize the property temporarily until ownership was resolved. That one made me laugh out loud. I sent it straight to Frank. "Don't worry," he said over the phone. "Courts hate HOAs that overstep. We'll respond formally, demand they cease all use of your land until this is settled. That means no dock, no picnics, no nothing." Sure enough, a week later, the HOA's beloved dock sat empty, yellow tape strung across it by order of the county pending the lawsuit's outcome. I may have gone down there that evening, sat on the end of the dock with a fishing pole, and waved at every HOA member who glared from their decks. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. But Gerald wasn't done. One night, just past midnight, I heard voices outside. I grabbed my flashlight, stepped onto the porch, and caught 3 men yanking the yellow tape off the dock. "Evening, boys," I called. They froze like deer in headlights. "Gerald send you?" I asked, shining the light right in their faces. They muttered something about community property before scurrying off like rats. The next morning, I installed trail cameras along the shoreline. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd be ready. Then came the day of the first court hearing. Gerald showed up in a tailored suit, flanked by 2 lawyers who looked like they billed by the minute. Half the HOA board sat behind him like a jury, arms crossed, faces smug. Me? I had Frank Dalton, 72 years old, in a rumpled jacket that smelled faintly of cigars. The judge, a stern woman with sharp glasses, listened patiently as the HOA's lawyers droned on about historical community usage and implicit easements. They waved photos of barbecues, boat parades, summer festivals, all held on what they claimed was community land. Then Frank stood. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "we have the original 1952 deed showing uninterrupted private ownership. No easements recorded. No sales, no transfers. My client owns this land outright. The HOA built structures on it without permission. Frankly, they're lucky we're not suing them for back rent." He handed up the documents. The judge read them carefully. Her brow rose. "Counsel," she said to the HOA lawyers, "do you have any deed, survey, anything showing your clients own this property?" They shuffled papers, mumbled excuses. "I see," the judge said coolly. "Until ownership is resolved, the HOA is barred from using or altering the disputed land in any way. Further, any harassment of Mr. Thompson will be considered retaliation."
Am I clear?
Gerald's face turned purple. Mine stayed neutral. On the inside, I was grinning ear to ear. After court, Gerald cornered me in the parking lot. "This isn't over," he hissed. "We'll appeal. We'll fight this all the way up." I sipped my coffee. "Do that. Every hearing just makes my eventual damages claim bigger." He looked like he wanted to strangle me. Instead, he stormed off, barking orders at his lawyers. Weeks passed. The HOA tried everything, filed motions, demanded new surveys, even petitioned the county to intervene. Every time, Frank swatted them down like flies. Meanwhile, I started digging through county records with the help of an old friend at the clerk's office. What we found made me laugh so hard I nearly fell off my chair. Turns out, back in the 80s, the county had offered to sell the HOA the very strip of land in question after my grandfather passed away and before I inherited it. The HOA declined, calling it too expensive, so they'd built their precious dock on land they knew they didn't own. Oh, this was getting better by the day. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the lake, I was grilling venison on the porch when a car pulled up. Out stepped a younger guy in a crisp suit, not one of Gerald's usual crew. "Mr. Thompson?" he asked. "That's me." He handed me a business card. "Big law firm. Bigger city. I represent several HOA members," he said carefully. "Not the board?" Individual residents, they're unhappy with how Mr. Withers has handled this. They'd like to discuss options with you directly. That got my attention. We met the next day at the local diner. 3 residents sat across from me, folks I'd seen around but never talked to much. We just want peace, one of them said. Gerald's turned this whole thing into a circus. If it costs us a little to buy the land properly, fine, but we don't want more lawsuits. We want him gone. I sipped my coffee, listening. Why tell me? I asked. The woman in the group leaned forward. Because you have the leverage to end him. The lawsuit, the trespassing. People are sick of it. If you countersue, half this HOA will back you just to get rid of Gerald. Well now, the idea of not just winning, but toppling Gerald from his little throne. That had a certain appeal. That night, I called Frank. Let's draft the countersuit, I said. For damages? He asked. Yep, trespassing, property damage, emotional distress. Hell, throw in attorney's fees while we're at it, and make sure Gerald's name is on it personally, not just the HOA. Frank chuckled darkly. Son, you're speaking my language. When the lawsuit hit, it was like kicking an anthill. Half the HOA lost their minds. The other half started whispering about removing Gerald as president. The local paper even ran a story. Lake Ho accused of trespassing on private land. Gerald called me at least 5 times in one day. I didn't answer once. But here's the thing about men like Gerald. The more cornered they get, the nastier they become. One evening, I found my mailbox smashed. Another night, someone dumped garbage on my dock. My trail cameras caught shadows moving along the shore at 2 a.m. Too grainy to identify, but clear enough to know it wasn't random. I gave the footage to the sheriff. Keep poking, Sheriff Hank told me. They'll slip up. I nodded. Because at this point, it wasn't just about land anymore. It was about teaching Gerald Withers and his little empire a lesson they wouldn't forget. And the storm was about to break wide open. The final hearing date landed on a bright Monday morning, the kind of day where the lake sparkled like glass and birds sang in the trees, completely at odds with the war about to erupt in court. By now, the entire county knew about the feud. Local news crews parked outside the courthouse, hoping to catch footage of Gerald Withers, the self-styled king of Lake Greenwater, facing off against the man he'd tried to evict from his own land. I arrived in my old Ford truck, parked it beside Frank Dalton's dusty Buick, and walked toward the courthouse steps. Frank met me halfway, carrying a thick folder under his arm, looking like a man about to enjoy himself. You ready? He asked, grinning around the cigar stub in his teeth. Born ready, I said. Inside, the place was packed. Half the HOA board sat on one side, glaring at me like I'd personally set fire to their dock. The other half, those tired of Gerald's antics, whispered among themselves, casting uneasy glances at their fearless leader. Gerald himself sat at the front, red-faced, jaw tight, flanked by 3 lawyers this time. He didn't look smug anymore. He looked cornered. Good. The judge entered, same sharp-eyed woman from before, and called the session to order. The HOA lawyers went first, arguing again about community traditions and implied rights. They claimed the dock was essential for residents, that removing it would cause irreparable harm. They even tried to paint me as the villain, saying I was threatening the peace of a long-standing community. Then Frank stood. Your Honor, he said smoothly, what we have here isn't complicated. My client owns the land. The HOA knew this, built on it anyway, harassed him, tried to evict him, and vandalized his property. We have deed records, survey maps, even county documents proving ownership never transferred. He handed the judge a fat packet of evidence, including photos of the smashed mailbox, the garbage dumped on my dock, and the late-night trespassers caught on camera. Furthermore, Frank added, voice rising, we have proof that Mr. Withers and the HOA acted maliciously, continuing to use and damage my client's land after being ordered by this very court to stop. That got the judge's attention. Frank, wasn't done. We are filing for damages totaling $250,000 for trespassing, property destruction, harassment, and attorney fees. And we request a permanent injunction barring the HOA from any claim on my client's land now or in the future. The courtroom went dead silent. Gerald shot to his feet. This is outrageous, he shouted. He's extorting us. That dock belongs to the people. The judge's gavel cracked like thunder. Sit down, Mr. Withers. The next hour was brutal for the HOA. Frank dismantled their arguments piece by piece, citing property law, showing decades of tax records where my family, not the HOA, paid on the disputed land. He even produced that old county offer from the 1980s, where the HOA had refused to buy the strip, proving they knew it wasn't theirs. By the time Frank finished, Gerald looked like a man watching his house burn down with him still inside. Finally, the judge spoke. Based on the evidence presented, she said clearly, this court finds in favor of the defendant and counterclaimant. Mr. Thompson, the disputed land belongs solely to him. The HOA is permanently barred from entry or use without express permission. Damages are awarded in the amount of $200,000. She slammed the gavel. Court adjourned. I just sat there for a second, letting it sink in. We'd won big. The fallout hit fast. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Gerald shoved past them, face like thunder, refusing to answer questions. The HOA board members split into two camps, those furious at him for losing, and those demanding his resignation on the spot. By evening, word spread that Gerald Withers had been voted out as HOA president in an emergency meeting. Apparently, the $200,000 judgment, plus legal fees, was coming out of HOA reserves, and the residents were livid. Couldn't have happened to a nicer guy. As for me, 2 days later, a delegation from the now leaderless HOA came knocking. Not angry this time, sheepish. Mr. Thompson, one of them began, twisting his baseball cap in his hands. We'd like to make things right. The dock, the picnic area, they're important to folks here. Maybe we could work out a lease? Or heck, you could join the board. Help run things proper. I leaned against my porch railing, considering. Truth was, I didn't want to spend my life bickering with HOA busybodies. But the idea of them paying me rent for the land they'd tried to steal, that had a certain poetry to it. Tell you what, I said finally. You can keep using the dock for a fee. And the board? I don't want a seat. But you're going to rewrite every bylaw, so no one else ever goes through what you put me through. Deal? They agreed on the spot. Meanwhile, Gerald Withers vanished from lake life entirely, sold his house within a month. Rumor had it he moved to Florida, where he was last seen yelling at teenagers for skateboarding near his condo. Couldn't have scripted it better. Summer rolled in not long after. The lake came alive again. Boats on the water, kids fishing off the dock, now officially leased from yours truly, neighbors waving as they passed. The tension that had gripped the place for months finally eased. One evening, I sat on that same dock with a cold beer, watching the sun sink low, painting the water gold. Frank joined me, lowering himself onto the bench with a satisfied grunt. Hell of a ride, he said, sipping his drink. Yeah, I agreed. Think they learned anything? He chuckled. Oh, I'd say so. You just taught every HOA in the county a lesson in property law they won't forget. We clinked bottles. A few weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. Not from the HOA, from individual residents. They wanted to throw a big summer party, on my land, of course, celebrating the new era of cooperation at Lake Greenwater. I almost laughed. From eviction threats to asking permission for a barbecue. But I said yes, why not? The day of the party, the shoreline buzzed with music, grills smoking, kids running everywhere. Someone even set up a fireworks display for after dark. I wandered through the crowd, getting nods and handshakes from folks who once glared at me over their picket fences. Funny how a court victory changes attitudes. At one point, a man raised his glass and shouted, "To Mr. Thompson, the man who beat the HOA!" The whole place cheered. I raised my beer in return, grinning. Later that night, as fireworks cracked over the lake and their reflections danced on the water, I sat back on my dock thinking about how it all started, with a stupid eviction notice nailed to my door. Gerald thought he ran this place. Thought he could bully me out, take what wasn't his, and hide behind bylaws and bluster. But in the end, turns out I didn't just own a cabin. I owned the land under their feet, the dock they loved, the very ground their precious HOA stood on. And now, they all knew it. As the last firework faded, the crowd drifted off, leaving the lake quiet again. I sat there a while longer, listening to the water lap against the shore. This was still my granddad's place. Still my family's land, and now Thanks to Gerald's arrogance, it always would be.